G'day, I'm Ian Dooley. Welcome to the Australian Employment Party podcast, Let's Get Fiscal. And this is the fifth and final episode of our introductory series. Just a bit of housekeeping first. You can find out all about us on our website, australianemploymentparty.org. You can also tweet at Ian Dooley and at FourthLeft2 on Twitter and use the hashtag OzMMT, that's OZMMT. And look us up on Facebook. We've got a Facebook group for Australian Employment Party, so you search that. And you'll be able to find us. So Tim, thanks for joining me again this week.
Hello again, Ian. How are you?
I'm mighty fine. How are you going?
Very good. Okay, and what are we up to this week? What are we talking about?
So this is the fifth and final of our intro series. And previously we've been talking a lot about the economic side of the party because that's the basis of a lot of our policy choices, which can be summarised as taxes don't pay for things, deficits are good, and there is no government debt. The primary policy outcome of all that is that we can pursue full employment through a job guarantee to ensure price stability. But this week, we wanted to look at some of the non-economic sides of the Australian Employment Party.
Sure. More in my area, very much involved on Twitter about virtually every subject in Australian political spectrum, yes.
That's right. We're moving more from hashtag AusEcon to hashtag AusPoll this week.
Oh, yes. Good. Nice. Yeah. I didn't know what a hashtag was 2 years ago. Okay. And then, in terms of, I think we're going to start with the social framework of, how AusMMT interprets and comments to the social framework questions.
Yeah. So it's a big dilemma when you're starting out a political party because we certainly don't want to be a single issue party and we don't want to be a protest party. We're not contesting this election in 2016, but we genuinely want to form a party that has a hope of holding government eventually. And so it's not about just economic revolution. We want to have a full policy, a range of policies developed. It's obviously hard for you and I to get together and write out reams and reams of policy documents. So we've come up with this approach that people should be able to trust to produce consistent decisions. And that's of having a policy framework for each of the major policy areas, so economic, social, and foreign policy. Sure. And the social policy framework is that the government should be an ethical authority and not a moral authority.
Indeed, yeah, it's an interesting turn of phrase, actually.
Yeah, so if we look at the difference between those two things, morals is basically how you choose to live your life, and ethics are how your choices affect other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's and certainly it's something that people could wrap their heads around and be very useful in a lot of cases. For instance, let me see now in terms of because next week we're going to be going to week to week type topical issues and the things that keep coming up are things like education, private education, all that sort of thing. What are the main things you're thinking about?
Well, to discuss the social policy framework, I reckon it's good to look at perhaps the most controversial issues we could possibly think of, the ones that are going to be the most divisive. Rather than trying to pussyfoot around them and tread lightly, we should just directly go for the things that are going to be most divisive.
Yes, yeah. Well, the headline acts. Yes, for sure. Okay.
So in my opinion, those are definitely marriage equality and abortion.
Sure. And you've spoken on abortion at length before, and marriage equality it just seems like an issue it's going to have its day soon, isn't it?
Well, hopefully. I mean, so if we start from the point of view of the social framework, morals and ethics, that the government should be an ethical authority and not a moral authority. When gay people get married, it doesn't affect anyone. It doesn't affect anyone who is not the couple. And so there's no way that the government could say that it's reasonable for the government to stop those people from getting married. People have all sorts of opinions on what marriage is or the sanctity of marriage, but when it comes down to Australian law, the Marriage Act does not discriminate according to religion. It doesn't discriminate according to a whole range of things that are included in traditional notions of marriage, but it does discriminate by specifying that it's a man and a woman that should be getting married. Why have that discrimination in there when there's really no reason for it? We've got no evidence that children raised by gay couples are any worse off, that there's some kind of poor outcome for child rearing or any other sort of ethical impact. It's simply moralizing on the behalf of the religious right, that's got its finger in the political pie. So really, there's no place for the government to be making those sorts of moral impositions, allowing one section of society to impose morals on another one.
No, well, it's a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it, really? I don't think we're going to get into too many swamps about that one.
I certainly think it's a no-brainer. But that's an example of how you would consider it through that position of morals and ethics. It really doesn't have any deleterious impacts on anyone. And it's not as, I mean, I know people are going to find it offensive, but there's not really a God-given right to not be offended. We don't have to go around not being offended all the time. Like, you can find something offensive, that doesn't make it unethical. So just because it's offensive to some people doesn't mean that the government should prevent people from doing that thing.
No, well, and that's that's reasonable. It just seems to me that we're just sort of taking a rational approach to as much as we can to every issue that we're involved with and we speak to. And as you said, the main thing that I think that we worked out, and you've mentioned that phrase before, is that we want to develop an approach that people can trust, because that's all people actually do when they start, supporting one political side or other. They actually trust the approach of that political party.
Right, and I think that having a framework approach that people can trust is way better than having a specific policy on one or two divisive issues that people get behind. Because what happens is, if you want to attract, for example, people who are opposing gay marriage, all you have to do is come out and oppose that. And so those people will then vote for you, even though you might not be looking out for their best interests economically. So we want to present an approach that is fair and allows lots of different moral backgrounds and moral frameworks to coexist successfully in Australia, rather than and then have people vote for us in their interest, rather than worrying about whether or not someone else is doing something, even though that thing doesn't actually impact them, because it's used as a way to manipulate voters, I think. And then hide really quite destructive policies behind that.
Yeah, I think over the last couple of years, people have probably become very accustomed to being manipulated through their emotions, and it's got to get old soon. It's got to get old anyway. So and then I think we're going to go on to Indigenous affairs.
Well, Indigenous affairs, the extreme inequality that Indigenous people in Australia suffer, I really don't see as being a moral issue or a social policy issue. It's almost purely economic. Aboriginal people have been economically and structurally excluded since Europeans invaded. Never mind, also killed relentlessly and then subject to missionary intervention. But at this stage, we're just piling on poor policy after poor policy. Really, I think that the best outcomes for Indigenous people in this country is going to come from wholesale inclusion in healthcare, more investment in regional Australia, and a job guarantee. Because it's going to take a long time to heal the damage, but I don't think we can do it through paternalistic intervention. It has to be inclusive, genuine economic investment, and really our economic framework takes care of that.
Well, that's right, and I think that once people get their head around the idea that there could be an approach that they could trust, or at least trial, and if it doesn't work, then we try another approach. It's sort of including the population in how things are done. At the moment, it seems really very distant, vicarious in the extreme. And I think we're going to touch on we're sort of like a core issue for both the major parties at the moment, isn't it? Asylum seekers. So we should go there.
Well, I just wanted to cover off on the social side of things around abortion, because that's another really divisive issue that I want to get right to the heart of in people's first introduction to the party, because it's really going to be something that people will either love or hate, but hopefully whether they love or hate abortion itself, they can look at our approach to dealing with it and use that as a means of trusting us to make consistent decisions.
I guess so, but I mean, it's big in America, but it's not so big here, is it? That it's not a vote winner, is it? Or vote loser abortion, is it?
State by state, there's some really horrendous stuff going on in Australia. It's nowhere near as bad as the US,
Mm.
but an interesting one to look at to analyze the approach of the social framework. So because it does start off as a moral choice and then becomes an ethical one. At the point where you could consider an unborn child to be another person, then it becomes an ethical issue. And prior to that, it's entirely a moral choice and should be left up to the mother. So that's another example of how you can take this moral, ethical approach and arrive at a very sensible decision, saying that at some point, yes, abortion is an ethical issue, and that should be legislated by the government. Prior to that point, it is completely moral choice and should be left up to the mother to decide.
Well, and that's fair enough. And I guess that like in a nutshell, that's where we've gone. And I think we're going to. I think you've cued me in earlier on to about now talk about foreign policy.
Yeah. So the foreign policy framework is also similarly simple. So rather than saying, let's address each of these individual foreign policy issues, we already have a really great body to operate through, and that's the UN. But we frequently go outside the UN. We don't engage properly with the UN. We don't engage with other countries through the UN. And we don't abide by our own obligations for treaties that we're signatory to under the UN. So the most obvious example of that is asylum seekers. We have not resettled people in Australia currently who have been found to be genuine refugees. About 50% of all people that have gone through assessment have been assessed as genuine refugees. They should be settled here immediately. And we should then be massively increasing our humanitarian intake because there's a huge refugee crisis going on. We're not doing enough. We could do far more in this country. We have so many resources, and we're trapped in this mental model of xenophobia, cowering here and behind our borders and behind our border force, and even calling it border force, and this hypocritical notion that we're saving lives by punishing innocent people who try and get on a boat. It's just ridiculous. So either really Australia just has to shit or get off the pot. Either we're in the UN, we sign the treaty, or we cancel it and say, okay, we're not going to engage with that. But do one or the other. Don't pretend that you have some humanitarian basis for punishing innocent families.
Well, political trickery is very much the new black. It has been lately anyway. People don't like to admit that they're being manipulated. They don't like to think of themselves as simpletons. But politicians see them that way, and they manipulate them as if they're simpletons. And unfortunately, it often works. So that's not how we're going to treat voters from our party. The way we think with things is that if you can't think for yourself, then we can help you. Okay, so how about we talk about what's coming up next week? We're probably got 2 minutes. We're talking about having a more topical format, day-to-day issue, week-to-week issues, and perhaps make it more entertaining than the didactic approach we've had until now.
Yeah, so the idea now is that basically we've got 3 years till the next election. And we want to use this platform of podcasting and YouTube and social media to really engage with the public and give them a chance to road test us and road test the approach and figure out whether or not they trust the approach that we have to policy development. Because there will come a time when we have to really develop specific policy. Up until that point, however, we can just spend each week discussing the topical news of the week through the lens of our social, economic, and foreign policy frameworks. And that will give people a real sense of who we are as a party and how the approach can be used methodically and systematically to produce consistent policy choices.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly. It's very interesting because I did a blog there this week, and I was able to talk about modern monetary theory to some degree, and then I was getting feedback from people saying thank you so much for talking about this because the government's making this monopoly money. It takes back the monopoly money. It can't spend it overseas. We don't need, taxes don't pay for things. Deficits are good. There is no government debt. But all this is somehow a secret. So we're hoping to talk to that week to week. I hope to become more and more educated as that happens, and then I'll still be playing doofus opposite you.
Well, you're my favourite doofus.
Yeah, good. There we go. All right then. Anything to finish?
That's it. I just wanted to make sure that everyone remembers that we are not a single issue party,
No.
that we're not a protest party. We do aim to form government, and that we aim to have a full policy approach, a framework approach to policy that people can trust is going to produce consistent decisions.
That's right, and I'll hold you to that.
Excellent. I hope you do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. See you, Tim.
Good night.